Hello, subscribers to the Pittsburgh Courier, and welcome to Circuit Court Entertainment, where we discuss how laws and history affect all forms of media. Today, we have a slightly different episode for you. While researching future topics, I found out about a prominent black newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, and its ties to Oakmont, Pennsylvania, where several members of my extended family live. The next time I was in town, I contacted Mr. Gary Rogers of the Oakmont Historical Society to see if he would give an interview about Robert Vann and the Courier's influence on pre-civil rights America, especially Black America. Gary Rogers agreed, and we had a lovely talk. Let's get into it. Hello, I am here at the Oakmont Historical Society, and would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Gary Rogers. I'm president and founder of the Oakmont Historical Society. We were established in 2008, and our little history center opened in 2013.
Well, that's definitely very interesting. So, does Oakmont have a very interesting history?
We do. For a small town, we're only about 1 square mile in area, but we have quite an interesting history that dates back to 1889 when the town was founded.
And is there anything that you find very interesting specifically with?
I guess they say all history is local, and you can always tie a national event. I can always say I can bring it back to Oakmont one way or another. So that's what I like to do, and I think when you can make a connection, that makes interesting all the history all the more interesting.
All right. So I'm here more specifically to interview you about the Pittsburgh Courier. Mm-hmm. And do you want to talk a little bit about what exactly the Pittsburgh Courier is?
The Pittsburgh Courier was a newspaper that was based in Pittsburgh, and it was an African-American newspaper. It was published by Robert L. Vann. And the newspaper and Mr. Vann were very influential in civil rights and those types of issues in the early part of the 20th century. Although it was based in Pittsburgh, I think it was published in 14 different cities, so it had nationwide coverage. And it was one of the most influential African-American newspapers in the country.
So what were the issues facing the Courier at the time?
A lot like there are today: civil rights, equality, anti-discrimination. The publisher, Robert Vann, was a huge leader as far as civil rights for Black Americans. And he published a lot of stories and had a lot of influence, not only with the African-American community, but the country in general.
What influences did the Courier have on Pittsburgh specifically?
As I said, it was the newspaper for the community. Mr. Vann, as I said, he always fought for equality and civil rights. He gave a lot of coverage to one of the areas with athletics. Mr. Vann gave coverage to a lot of Black colleges, athletic events, because for the most part they were ignored by the white press. He covered what we called the Negro Leagues, the baseball leagues, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, the Homestead Grays, and all of the teams, and he brought attention to those and fought for the rights of Black athletes to be included in mainstream sports. He also covered Jesse Owens. When Jesse Owens went to the Berlin Olympics, Robert Vann went along with him, and he was in the stadium, and he covered Jesse Owens and the Olympics and that story, and he brought it back to United States and published it in his newspapers. So he was a big proponent of equality for Blacks at the time.
So the famous photo of Jesse Owens, is that a Courier photo?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know if it is or not, but he was there, and he noted that he was in the stadium and he sat below Hitler. Hitler was in the stadium at the time. And after Jesse Owens had won, Hitler left because he didn't want to have to shake his hand. So, but he covered that, yes.
Jesse Owens is very cool.
Yes, yes.
So, and then you had said also about how it was in 14 different cities, and therefore it had a bit of a wider influence. Mm-hmm. So, what else did they work on? What was some of the more national aspects that they covered?
Mr. Vann was very active in national politics. He was a Republican and supported the Republican Party. However, in 1932, he gave a speech in Cleveland, which he called The Patriot and the Partisan. And in that speech, he urged the African Americans to switch from supporting the Republicans to support Franklin Roosevelt. He felt that the Republicans were no longer meeting the needs of the black community. And so he urged them to switch. And most of them had been loyal Republicans because of Abraham Lincoln and everything that he had done with, freeing the slaves and whatnot. And it was Robert Vann who really got the African American voting bloc to go Democrat. And so he was a big part of that they switched over to the Democrat. However, he did say that it's not so important to vote party as it is vote the man. Mm-hmm. And that was important to him. And I read an article that when he passed away, in the same edition as his obituary, the Courier came out in favor of Wendell Willkie. So, they went back and forth. And later, Mrs. Vann was a supporter of Eisenhower. So, he thought everybody should be looked at fairly and vote the man, not necessarily the party.
Okay. Now, I did see your talk that you did, which was very, very interesting.
I think the thing that most impressed me about Robert Vann, he grew up, experienced extreme segregation, discrimination. But whenever he came to a roadblock, he went around it. Mm-hmm. When he grew up with a family by the name of Askew, and his mother was the cook for this family. They were a wealthy family in North Carolina. And she worked for the family. She was their cook, and they paid her $3 a month. That was her salary. And Robert and his mother lived in a room off of the kitchen. But the Askew family were very good to Robert and his mother. And Robert was friends with the Askew children and the children in the area. However, when it was time to start school, the children went to school. Robert wasn't allowed to attend the white schools. Mm-hmm. So he had to go to what they called, it was the colored school at the time. He had to walk 12 miles to get to school. The school was only in session 5 months out of the year because they didn't have the funding to go any longer. So even though he wasn't able to go to school with the white children, he went. And he did well, and he taught his mother to read when he was only 7 years old. So from there, he went and he worked and he enrolled in the Virginia Union College, which was an all-black college at the time. He studied journalism. He found an opportunity for scholarships at the Western University, which became University of Pittsburgh. He applied and was accepted, and that's what brought him to Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. And while there, he studied law, and he graduated with a law degree from the University of Pittsburgh. He was only one of 5 black attorneys in Pittsburgh at the time. And he had hoped to be a criminal defense attorney. However, one of the problems was, we'll go back. So he graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a law degree. He set up an office. He worked as a criminal defense attorney. And then he was hired into the city of Pittsburgh as an attorney. He was the first black person to be hired in the city of Pittsburgh. So he was always looking for another opportunity, and he didn't let this discrimination hold him down. Mm-hmm. One of his clients was a man by the name of Edwin Harleston, who owned the Pittsburgh Courier. Mm-hmm. And Robert began to write articles and submissions to the newspaper, and then Mr. Harleston took him on as a partner, and he became publisher. So he always excelled at what he did. Very hard worker, and had a lot of vision,
Judging from I'm going to go back a second. Judging from the various things you had said about the time periods and stuff like that, it sounds like he was around during the integration of the Negro, I'm sorry, I believe I read it, leagues and the professional baseball leagues.
Yes,
so do you remember?
Yes. Yeah, the Pittsburgh Courier, he hired a sports reporter division, sports division, and they covered the Negro leagues. And it was really through the Pittsburgh Courier that they had achieved this fame and this attention. Satchel Paige and all of those players, he covered those leagues and really brought them into the forefront. And he was a big proponent of integrating sports, that the people the blacks should have the same opportunity. Same with Joe Louis, the boxer. He covered that. And as I said, black colleges, he covered those athletics and really brought them into the forefront. He felt that they deserved the coverage that they weren't getting from the white newspapers.
Well, now I'm kind of curious if he also covered were there any black women's sports going on at the time?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, back then I don't know I never heard of any separate black women's sports. Yeah.
So, I think, okay, I can't remember if you said this was a no or not, but were there, did it cover the black media, like plays or books or anything?
Not that I'm aware of. I didn't find anything as far as, separate
reviews.
And, I'm sure they did but I don't know of anything
specific.
Specific, exactly.
Well, I'm considering what you're saying in regards to the black culture at Pittsburgh. I am very sure that the arts of Black Pittsburgh at the time must have been really interesting.
Yeah, I know. The Hill District, we had the Crawford Grill, which was a jazz venue, and a lot of the black artists at the time, everybody played the Crawford Grill.
I didn't even realize Pittsburgh had a jazz.
Oh yes, the Crawford Grill was one of the jazz hotspots in the country. I mean, that was very famous for that. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I guess I should ask, how integrated was Oakmont then?
Oakmont was it was majority were white people. We did have some black families that lived here. Now, Robert bought a house here in Oakmont and lived up on 14th Street, and he was a part of the community. After he passed away, one of the stories we like to tell is the Oakmont High School was forming a marching band, and they had no uniforms, and they marched in their street clothes. Well, Mrs. Vann bought the entire band uniforms for the Oakmont High School band. So, they were a part of the community, here in Oakmont and also in Pittsburgh.
Mrs. Vann sounds like a character, too.
Yeah, she was very, after her husband, he passed away in 1940 at the age of 61. She took over the reins of the Courier, and she ran it up until around, I think she passed in 67, but I think she ran it up through 1965. But she was very active in the NAACP. President Eisenhower offered her a position as a delegate at the United Nations.
Wow.
And she also represented the United States at different types of delegations that went abroad. However, she decided not to take the United Nations post because she thought it would take away from her work at the Courier.
Yeah, I can see that.
She continued on in her husband. The two of them really worked for equal rights. They pushed for more doctors in black neighborhoods, hospitals, that type of thing, so that the African Americans had proper care. Big proponents of equality. Robert Vann also pushed for equality in the military. No longer discrimination. And in the lead up to World War II, he did a lot of work, to adjust that and get equal rights for blacks in the military. During World War II, as part of the war effort, they had what they called Liberty ships. And these were part of the merchant marines. And these were the ships that supplied all the war materials to Europe during the war. And in 1943, the Navy christened the SS Robert L. Vann. He had a Liberty ship named after him. And his wife, Jessie, was there for the christening of the ship. So he was honored that way, too. Here in Pittsburgh, he had an elementary school that was named for him, Robert Vann Elementary School. And at his college, Virginia Union, they named the bell tower at the college after him. It's the Robert Vann Bell Tower. So he did receive numerous awards and commendations throughout his life and after his life.
Yeah. I guess, though, before I get into the full wrap-up, I am sitting here in a room full of Pittsburgh memorabilia, specifically Oakmont memorabilia. What's been your favorite thing that you've managed to collect related to the Oakmont stuff?
Oh, boy, there's so much. I mean, I have to tell you, this is something that just came in.
Okay.
And I'm very excited about it.
Ooh.
We had a large swimming pool that was located here in Oakmont in the beginning of the 20th century. It was a huge pool called the Willows Pool. And we had a gentleman that was manager of the pool. And he had this, thing that he would do every Christmas. He would send out Christmas cards to celebrities and famous people and politicians all over the world. And he would, Christmas greetings from Oakmont, Willows Pool. And he would send them a free pass to the pool.
To get any of them to come.
So I don't know that any of them came, but a lot of them responded with autographed pictures.
Oh, that's fun.
And we have autographed pictures of Bob Hope, Shirley Temple, Woody Herman and his entire band. I mean, it's that many. We just received it from this gentleman's grandson. So we're very excited about that. And we'll be putting together an exhibit for that. But I think there's just so much here. And everybody, you just have a connection to your hometown, and anything from the hometown that comes in, from the smallest thing to something like that, it's like, wow, that's just cool to have it, and we're going to save it for future generations.
Yeah. So as we're getting into the wrap up, I guess I should ask, how did you get interested in Robert Vann and the Pittsburgh Courier and all that?
Well, it's sort of a funny story. My family's been. Well, we were I'm part of the original founders that came here in 1816, so we have a long history. My grandfather had a business here. He was a heating furnace man, roofing man. And when Mr. Vann lived in Oakmont, my grandfather did a lot of work for him. And so he became friends with Robert Vann. This was back in the 1930s. And so my grandmother always talked about Robert Vann because my grandfather liked him so much, and he was such a gentleman, and they were just good friends. And so I can remember, so as a child, I always knew about Robert Vann, you know, and so when we formed the Historical Society, I thought, that's a good opportunity to let people know who he was and how famous he was. And he lived here. He was one of our residents. But I'll never forget, my grandmother always told the story. My grandfather had been up there working at the house, and Billy Eckstein, who was a famous singer from that time period, was there. So my grandfather got to meet Billy Eckstein and shake his hand. Well, my grandmother just thought that was the greatest thing. And for years afterwards, she talked about that. So, Robert Vann, I've known about him since I was a small child, and I always just wanted to make sure that people knew who he was. So.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I guess to finish up, what do you hope people will get from this interview?
I hope they learn who he was, and I hope they would look, try to find more about him. He was a fascinating man and did a lot of good for the country, not just the black, but whites as well. I mean, he did a lot for the country, and I think he should be recognized for that.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure to interview Mr. Rogers, and maybe I don't call you that because that's an entirely other topic that I should get into at some point.
Different Mr. Rogers.
Different Mr. Rogers. I do this all the time. I'll go do something. It's like, and that's a separate topic, and that's a separate topic, and that's a separate topic. So, at some point, I'll probably do Mr. Rogers, and if I do, maybe I'll come back and interview you again.
We do have an Oakmont connection to Mr. Rogers.
Yes, you do.
I'm sure you're aware of it.
I am.
Mr. McFeely was married here.
So next time I pass through town, maybe we'll go talk about Mr. McFeely and the wedding and the whole connection to Oakmont. That'll be another episode.
Thank you.
All right. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you again to Gary Rogers and the Oakmont Historical Society. I will be putting additional links in our sources page if you want to research any more of this topic in depth, including the video I mentioned during the interview. And I hope you, dear listeners, will join me for our next episode. If you want to follow the podcast on social media, we can be found on all major podcast platforms, CCE Pod at Twitter, and Circuit Court Entertainment on Tumblr. See ya!